Oh, look at that.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Andrea Hood, and I am a grants manager at the Recreation and Conservation Office, or RCO. And I am going to be presenting the Working Lands Grants Opportunities webinar today with Kim Sellers. How do I get rid of this? To kick us off and orient you to RCO. Thank you. I want to welcome you all today, and RCO includes the Recreation and Conservation Funding Board, which is made up of 5 citizen members and 3 state agency members. RCO's director, Megan Duffy, is here to say a few words.
Hello, good morning. Oh, good afternoon. Welcome, everybody. Glad to have you here. Glad you are able to participate in this webinar. These programs are critical to conserving farmland and forest land around the state, and we greatly appreciate the work that you do to make it happen. We are here to assist as you make your way through the process, and we wish you all the best of luck. And good grant round, good webinar. Thank you. You ready to slide back in?
Right. During the rest of the webinar, we'll do a quick RCO overview and then move into the Working Lands grant opportunities, a little about navigating our web pages and online grant system, and then save time for questions. Related to questions, I'll ask that you just please hold off until towards the end, since you want to get through all the information, and we may answer your questions during the webinar. I also want to note that we won't have time today to answer detailed project-specific questions, but please reach out to your grants managers in the next few days or weeks for help. Today, we can field the higher level questions about the grant programs, categories, processes, and eligibility. So if you have those higher level questions today, you can type them into the Q&A function in Zoom, and we'll address them toward the end of the webinar and as we move along. At RCO, we have 2 sections of grants. It's the Recreation and Conservation section and the Salmon Recovery section. On the Recreation and Conservation side, we have about 15 programs, some of which have sub-programs and categories that together amount to around 40 grant opportunities with varying goals. And the Working Lands grant programs we'll cover this afternoon include 2 categories in the Washington Wildlife and Recreation Program: the Farmland Preservation and Forestland Preservation categories, and the separate Community Forest Program. At RCO, we have 12 grants managers who work on the Recreation and Conservation side. Currently, Kim Sellers and I, outlined in the yellow boxes, handle the Working Lands grants. Once you start a grant application, you'll be assigned to a grant manager. And contact information for all our RCO grant managers is on our website at rco.wa.gov. Just click on the Contact Us links. To get us started thinking about timelines for spring grant applications, this slide generally reminds us that the applications open today and are due on May 1st this year. Just a heads up that if the current 2024 manual is not yet posted on a specific grant program page, it'll be there in the next couple of days. During technical review, so as we're moving through the key steps, during technical review, evaluators review a project application's written responses and visuals and give feedback about strengths, concerns, or questions. You'll have a chance to make changes based on the technical review feedback, and then you'll resubmit your application by the technical completion date. The final evaluation process will produce a list of ranked projects by score in each grant program and category. The ranked lists are submitted to the legislature to consider for the 2025 through 27 biennium funding. And based on those ranked lists and amount of funding available, the grants will be awarded in July 2025. Now we'll look more closely at the three working lands grant programs. The farmland preservation and the forest land preservation categories in the larger Washington Wildlife and Recreation Program and this separate community forest program. Starting now, I'm going to start referring to Washington Wildlife and Recreation Program as WWRP. So WWRP's farmland preservation and the forest land preservation grant categories are funded through WWRP's farm and forest account. The farmland and forest land categories have similar purposes. They seek to prevent land from being developed for uses other than agriculture or forestry. Grant funding is awarded to help buy development rights and conservation easements on farmland and on forest land so that the land remains available in the future for agriculture or for timber production. So who can apply? So eligible applicants are the same for the farmland and the forest land categories. Cities, counties, qualified nonprofit organizations, and the State Conservation Commission are eligible to apply. These applicants apply for the grant on behalf of a landowner. If a grant is awarded, the applicant becomes the grant sponsor, and that sponsor will hold the eventual easement that's placed on the property. If you're a first-time applicant, please review the applicant requirements section in the grant manual of the program you're interested in and get in touch with either me or Kim. To give you an idea of how much funding might be available, this slide gives you a quick overview of how the WWRP budget works. The farm and forest account is one of three accounts in the overall WWRP budget. The figure on the right shows that of the total funds appropriated for the WWRP, 10% is available for the farm and forest account. Within that 10%, 90% is available for the farmland projects and 10% goes towards forest land projects. The table on the left shows the amount that was allocated to the farm and forest account for the current 2023 through 25 biennium. With an overall WWRP allocation of 120 million, farmland and forest land received just over 11.5 million. Still looking at the farmland and forest land categories together, neither grant category has a minimum grant threshold. The farmland category has no maximum grant request, while forest land has a $500,000 limit. If you have a combination project that includes acquisition along with restoration or enhancement, the restoration costs must be no more than 50% of the easement value. Both categories require a 50% match. However, that match requirement doesn't apply to the State Conservation Commission. And although in the past 10% of the 50% sponsor match had to be from a non-state, non-federal source, the Recreation Conservation Funding Board waived this requirement for the 2022 and 2024 grant cycles only. So for this 2024 application round, no non-state, non-federal source match source is required. The various types of match that are eligible are listed here. For the farm and forest account, no other RCO grants can be used as match. Speak with your grants manager early about your matching sources so that we can make sure the sources are eligible. All items being included as match must also be eligible in the grant program. Generally, grant funds are intended to be the last piece of a funding puzzle for a project. You'll need to be able to certify that you have your matching resources in hand before receiving grant funding. Now I'm going to just review a few elements specific to the farmland preservation category. For farmland preservation grants, the land included in the application must meet the definition of farm and agricultural land as defined in the state's Open Space Tax Act, and you will need to submit that documentation by the May 1st application due date. Your project must include purchase of an agricultural easement, not fee simple acquisition. The landowner will own the underlying land, but the easement retires development rights and restricts land uses so that the land remains in a farmable condition for the life of the easement. A secondary purpose of the grant category is to enhance or restore ecological functions. Examples could be installing fencing to keep livestock out of streams, removing invasive species, and or planting native vegetation to enhance ecologic function. As applicants to the farmland preservation category, you'll be submitting written responses to the evaluation criteria outlined in the 2024 WWRP Farmland Preservation Manual 10F. Evaluation committee members will review the written responses and visuals. You won't be doing a PowerPoint presentation. Please closely review the manual guidance related to maps and visuals. Of course, you'll want to closely review the evaluation criteria and be responsive to try and score as many points as possible. And note that extra points are awarded for including support letters and match above the minimum required. Available on the WWRP Farmland page, please closely review the applicant to-do list and follow the PRISM attachments guidance. You'll need to plan ahead to complete items by the May 1st application due date and the July 11th technical completion date. We'll speak more to some of the submittal requirements later in the webinar. Now I'm going to turn over the presentation to Kim Sellers to talk more specifically about Forestland grants.
Okay. Thank you, Andrea. Hi, I'm Kim Sellers, and I'm a grants manager here at RCO. And I'm going to share with you two grant programs, the Forestland grants for the Washington Wildlife and Recreation Program, as Andrea said, WWRP. And then afterwards, I'll switch to the community forest programs. But we will pause between the two programs so that you can submit questions as we go along, and we'll try to answer them when we get to the end of the WWRP Forestland descriptions, and then we'll wait a couple minutes and then move on. Also, I want to say up front that as a grants manager at RCO, it's my job to help you navigate our system so that you can submit the best application that you can. And I like my job, and I'm really happy to help you. So if there's anything that I can do to help you at any point in the application process, please let me know. And in general, email reaches me faster than phone messages. Just wanted to share that. Okay. All right. So starting with the WWRP Forestland, the primary purpose of the Forestland grant is the protection of land for timber production through a conservation easement. And note that this primary purpose is something that will be of particular importance to you when you start to draft your conservation easement, where the primary purpose of the grant program will necessarily be the primary purpose of your easement. And then secondary to that purpose are the other benefits that protecting forest land, including jobs, recreation, provides. So which they can also be included in your conservation easement, but they must be secondary to that primary purpose of protecting land for timber production. So as you complete your application, please note that that all the land in your application must be designated through the Open Space Tax Act as either forest land or timberland. A requirement of the WWRP Forestland program is that you correct any fish passage barriers and that the farmland easement be in perpetuity. So as Andrea said, plan ahead. It seems like every year there's projects that we have to give extensions for authorizing resolutions and landowner acknowledgement form, or there's a big rush at the end just to try to get these documents attached in PRISM. So just know that you will not be able to submit your application unless you have these documents prepared, and the acknowledgement form and the authorizing resolution, those need to be signed by entities outside of your general staff. So those could take a little bit longer to complete. And I'll show you where to get the applicant to-do lists here as we move forward. Okay. In Forestland, there's a couple things that you need to know. It's a conservation easement only. And unlike farmland and Forestland, there are no development rights allowed to remain on the property. So that means no building envelopes. And then there's a couple of things that we've got available, and I just want to make sure that everybody's aware of them. And they are the buy, protect, sell options and waivers. So RCA was approached a couple of years ago and we were asked if we could adopt a formal buy, protect, sell option for our farmland program. And we were able to get the board to approve that in early 2023. But it seems like folks are still not aware of that. So I just wanted to emphasize that here. So under this option, RCO will still only be able to pay for an easement on the property, and this is for farmland and forestland. But you'll be able to acquire the property in fee, place an easement on the property, and then hold the underlying land until you're able to sell it at a later date. So note that this might require that you have a waiver of retroactivity with us. So when you think that you're going to be entering into this kind of an option, then let's talk about that to make sure that we don't have any surprises at the end. So under the buy, protect, sell option, this means that a sponsor may own both the underlying land and a conservation easement on the same property. And in the past, there was concern that this would result in a merger of title under the real estate law. But we recently got a ruling from our Assistant Attorney General, or AAG, that because RCO is a third party beneficiary to these easements, our interests ensure that there is no merger of title under a BPS scenario. And additionally, RCO requires that both the farmland and forestland easements include a clause that says that there is no merger of title. So that is a kind of an extra thing that keeps things from merging together. So the other thing is that RCO has two types of waivers. So we do have the standard waiver of retroactivity, which is for the purpose of property and fee. And I think that's the standard one that most people are aware of. But basically, you let us know that you're going to be purchasing a piece of property in fee. We issue a waiver and look at some of the documents that you have for the property, such as appraisals and a title report, maps, that kind of thing, just to make sure there aren't any big red flags. And then we issue a letter with a waiver number on it that allows you to acquire the property and still hold the eligibility for that property for grant funds later. That's just a standard waiver of retroactivity. But for farmland and forestland, we also have an option of a second type of waiver, which is for, again, only farmland and forestland easements. It's not for general conservation easements. But under an easement waiver, RCO will still need to participate in the development of the easement, and then we sign the easement prior to closing. And what's different is that we would include a clause in the easement that basically says that if RCO provides grant funding by XX date, then we are a third-party beneficiary. And if we don't provide grant funds by then we are not a third party. And later, you'll need to record a statement with the assessor's office that clarifies RCO's role, whether we are or are not a third party. So folks seem to not be aware of that option, and I just want to make sure that that's out there for everyone. So that's kind of all I had for WWRP Forestland. And I just want to stop and see if there's any questions that we have right off that we need to answer. And before we move on to community forests. And I am not sure how to find the questions on this screen, but do you
Jim,
want,
I could just pop in.
that would be awesome. Thank
Hey,
you.
everybody. So far, the only question was about, are we gonna update our manuals? And the answer is yes. Just be a little bit patient. The Community Forest Program manual was just posted, so the 2024 manual's out there.
Oh, good.
We're trying to get them all done today. It might take a few more days. So just keep checking back. If you open one and it still says 2022, just check back the next day, wait till the 2024 manual gets posted.
The nice thing is that the criteria questions are, because these are written processes, the criteria questions are in PRISM, and there aren't any changes since last year, but there is a description of some of these things such as buy, protect, sell, and waivers in those new manuals. So that might be something that would be handy to have. Okay, if there's nothing else, I'm gonna keep on moving. Okay, so now I'm gonna go over the community forests program. Before I get into too much detail about this program, I want to mention that we have Ben Donatelli here with us today on Zoom. And he's the person in our policy section who worked to develop this program. And I have to say, and it's not just because Ben is listening in, but I actually absolutely love this grant program. And that's because this program is to purchase forest land in fee for the production of timber that you can harvest to generate income for your organization. So any funds generated need to go back first to taking care of the community forest. But then if you have extra funds available, you're able to use those funds for other things such as purchasing more land or other organizational needs. So it really helps you to be in a self-sustaining kind of mode rather than relying on grant funds. So yeah, so it just helps fund your conservation efforts into the future. And it's a really great program, and I really strongly encourage you to consider applying for this program. If you want to talk about it anytime, please call me. I'm very enthusiastic about this program. I'm happy to help with this. So the primary purpose of this program is to protect and maintain actively managed forests. The focus being on an economic benefit to your community while also providing protection to forests and all of those wonderful benefits that forests provide, such as protection from wildfires, climate change, carbon sequestration, habitat, recreation, and others. But the specific focus and goals of your community forest will depend on your community values, so determined through public involvement. So this means that basically you're able to use public input. We encourage public input so that you can manage your forest in a way that meets the needs of your community. And so those forests can include things like hiking, recreational hiking or mountain bike trails, wildlife protection, environmental, cultural, education. There's a lot of things that these community forests can provide, but it is a community effort. And so yeah, and then also doing all these things while also focusing on a source of economic gain through the sale of forest products. So as for RCO grant funds, your application must include the purchase of land and fee, not a conservation easement. But then after that, these grant funds can be used for development and recreational amenities, habitat restoration, or even the treatment of forest health practices. So the non-acquisition activities are limited to 10% of the total project costs. And again, any funds that you generate by timber revenue must first be used to manage the forest. But then once those needs are met, the funds can be used to meet other needs of your organization. So that's a significant difference from some of our other grant programs. So then moving on to other things, like I said, I think I said this before, it's a written evaluation process. It's fee acquisition, so it's land value, not an easement. But here's the other part that's really awesome, is that these grant funds can be used to purchase the timber value along with the land. So you're purchasing the timber value, and then you're able to harvest those trees and generate revenue from the sale. So a grant funding for this program is limited to 3 million, and the match requirement for this grant program is only 15%. So think about this. So this program can pay for the value of the standing timber, right? And then you can have a timber sale immediately after you acquire the property, sell some of the timber value and recoup that 15% match. So, you know, I think a lot of applicants kind of miss this critical benefit of this program. We see a lot of applications come in for land that has recently had the timber value removed from the property. And really, if that's the only way that a landowner will sell their land is after the trees are harvested, then buying land without a standing timber on it may make sense. But when RCO grant funds can be used to also pay for the timber value based on the timber crews, it seems that a more strategic approach to these grants would be to purchase the property prior to harvest so that you can realize the benefit of that sale. Another thing that I like about this program is that in addition to public agencies and nonprofit organizations, tribes are also eligible to apply, where they are not eligible in WWRP Forestland. So if you're serious about wanting to apply to this grant program, you're likely wondering how much funding is available. That's a good question. So in 2020, we had kind of a latent need for application or for grant funding. And so that first year, it was 2020, we got 16 applications and we were able to fund 7 of them. And we had $15.6 million. In this second grant round in 2022, we had 5 applications and we funded 3 of them, and we had $7.5 million that we were able to contribute to that. So, you know, while we don't know what our funding will look like in 2024, Ben Donatelli is here, and he may be able to shed some light on the projects that are still left unfunded in 2022, and maybe what the funding might look like for 2024. So Ben, are you, oh, there he is. Hi, Ben.
Hi, Kim. Yeah. Oh boy. Yeah, I mean, I don't have a lot to offer except that you're right. We did receive $7.5 million from the 2022 grant round, and we're able to fund 3 projects. We have since actually requested additional funding in the supplemental budget to fund the remaining 2 projects on that list. So we're hopeful. We're, you know, in terms of what that means for 2024, as you've got on the slide here, it's a little bit of an unknown. This is such a new program, and we're still in the process of educating the legislature, public, and everybody about the benefits of this program. And so it's going to really depend on the list that we generate and how many projects can come in. So I think we're excited about the momentum that we see towards this program and the interest that is building in this program, both out there in the world and also in the legislature. So we're excited and hopeful that, you know, the remaining 2 projects on the 22 list can be funded through the supplemental round, and then we'll get a good robust list that we can send to the legislature for the 2025 biennium.
That's excellent. Yeah, so the more projects that we get, more applications that we get, maybe we can justify a higher budget request in 2024. So it's not limited to what you see in the past funding. It's more about what the need is out there in the communities and what we can justify to the legislature. So, I mean, that's another really cool part of this program is we've got that kind of flexibility. So that's awesome. Thanks, Ben. All right, so another requirement of the community forest programs is the completion of a community forest management plan. And that has to be completed prior to the completion of the grant. So there are specific things that need to be included in this plan. And I'm not going to go over that in depth right now because that's not part of the application process, but rather something that needs to be completed during the grant agreement. But the main takeaways that I wanted to share with you are first that as you proceed with the application, you're aware that this work is going to need to be completed. And then also let you know that you can include up to $30,000 in your grant application for the completion of this plan. And you might, some of you might be aware of the fact that we have the option of completing a stewardship plan in other programs. And that's up to $10,000. I believe you can also ask for that in this grant program as well. But the fact that we can allow $30,000 for a forest plan is actually, it's going to be extremely helpful, I believe. So in addition to the items listed on that last slide, there's also the requirement that your plan includes cultural resources review, as well as an inadvertent discovery plan that describes the process that you plan to take should you discover new previously unknown cultural resources sites. Here's a few dates that you might want to be aware of. Specifically, PRISM is open now. You can start submitting applications. They're due for the first submittal by May 1st. And you'll notice that between May 1st and July 11th, there actually is not a formal technical review period. So what'll happen is I'll review your applications in-house. I'll give you some feedback, and then I'll return the application to you. You continue to work on it until the technical completion deadline. Written reviews between July 22nd and August 13th, and then we'll start writing grant agreements July 15 of 2025. Sorry, July 15 of 2025. Okay, so I thought that I'd do a quick comparison of community forest to WWRP Forestland, just so that it's clear which one you might want to apply in. So community forest, again, is land and fee. WWRP Forestland is an easement only. So it's buying an easement on a private forest landowner's property versus actually owning the property yourself. So under community forest, those proceeds, that means, that the proceeds that come from, forest revenues can be spent by your agency. And also the community forest program is a lot more flexible, and it allows for community-driven values and management to be included, where the WWRP Forestland program is less flexible, and the focus has to be primarily on the production of timber. Again, there's some requirements that are going to be needed to be attached to PRISM before you can submit your application. And in community forests, because it's a new program, we actually have not had a requirement where PRISM won't let you actually submit your application unless you attach an authorizing resolution. That actually is due at technical completion, so or sooner if you can get it. So that's something that needs to be considered. That's not something that we've required that early in the past, and this year we're really going to have to work to make sure that that happens. There's also going to need to be a landowner acknowledgement form, and that has to be signed by the landowner. And then for local agency review, you kind of get a break for community forests, and that we only require notice of your grant application to the local jurisdictions, where with farm and forest, we require a conferral process. So conferral being a back and forth discussion. It's not enough to just send them a letter and say, we're going to apply for grant funds. You want to try to solicit a response if you can. So under farm and forest, that conferral means that if you don't get a response the first time you submit a letter, you're going to need to contact them again and possibly follow up with a phone call and just put a lot more effort into it. So community forest is a little bit less effort in that regard, but you still want to make sure that you do a diligent job in trying to communicate to those legislators. There's some manuals that you're going to want to look at while you develop your application. And in a minute, I'll show you how you can get to those manuals, as well as the application to-do list. And then part of that authorizing resolution that I just mentioned is decisions about who's going to sign your grant agreements. So before I end this webinar session, I need to share a quick review of using PRISM Online. And I don't really have time to go into depth in this. So the best thing would be for you to contact me if you run into any snags. And that really goes for all our grant programs. All our grant managers are here to help you. And all of us enjoy our jobs, and we're all happy to help whenever we can. So, but here's kind of an overview real quick. So if you go to our website, which is rco.wa.gov, you'll get this page, right? And then one of the first things I do is look at grants. There's also this PRISM login right here, and I'll talk to you about that in just a second. But basically, I click on this grants page or tab here, and that takes you to this page where you get a lot of good information. So here's all of our programs, our grant programs. So here's the Farmland and Forestland grant pages, programs. There's also tab for our manuals where you can get a list of all of our manuals. But if you click, in this instance, for an example, I clicked on the Community Forest Program here, and this is what I get. So, and this is pretty similar to what you would get for all of our grant programs. You get a grant manual for that program. And then here's all the forms you're going to need, right? There's the authorizing resolution, certification match, all of the forms that you're going to need. There's also the to-do list right here. And then the manuals that would relate to this grant program. And then, so here's also general resources. Here's your application webinar presentation from 2022. And I would imagine that we're going to put 24 on here as well here in the next couple of weeks. So the other thing you get is the application schedule. And you can get a list of all of the previously awarded grants in ranked order so that you can find out what was the top scored project in 2022, and you can look at it and see what did they do that worked for the evaluators and what did the lowest ranked project maybe miss. And with that, I mean, you're welcome to look at those. We try to keep it an open and honest competition, and you're always welcome to look at the other applications online. That's an open process. So it's not that you're cheating by looking at other examples, because this is all leading towards you putting your best foot forward and putting together the strongest application you can so that you're going to be more successful at the end. So I think that's it for that page. Let's see. So going back to the prison account. So if you at the top of that page, I mentioned this is our main page from rco.wa.gov. If you go to Prism login, then that's where you can get the information for logging into Prism. And so if you are a new applicant to RCO grants and you haven't had a Prism login ID in the past, you're going to be asked to create a secure access Washington account. We started that a couple years ago when we got hacked by some undesirable folks. And so we had to bump up our security. So we require that you do a secure access account, and that there's directions for how to do that when you click on that Prism login, but it's not an easy process. I mean, we all had to do it as grant managers. There's some snags in it. So if you run into any problems, just call us and we can hopefully help you walk through those or find somebody who can help you. And then there's also instructions for how to ask for or request a Prism login ID or to change your password or any other help that you might need with Prism. So when you do get into Prism, this is kind of what you're going to see. You're going to see this page where there's a new button here that says Start New Application, right? You can click that and then you'll fill in your organization, your grant program that you're going to apply for, the type of project, and then you can hit Start a New Application. And that actually gives you, start your application and gives you a number. So you're going to want to remember your number, right? First, you're going to give it a grant name as well. So that would be helpful, but this number will be helpful to you. So, write that down and make sure you have it. There's also a couple of things on this page that help you navigate. So there's a navigation tree, and basically our application process, it just kind of walks you through it, and hopefully it's pretty straightforward, but there's a navigation tree here, and you can click on any one of these different tabs that will take you to a different page. I don't know that when you click on those tabs on the navigation page that it necessarily saves your work. If you want to save, you have to hit save and or hit next, which doesn't auto save. So that's just something to remember. You don't want to lose everything. So then that takes me to evaluation, and real quick, we've got, here's the schedule, and this is the same for farmland and forestland and community forest, except that here it shows for farm and forest, there's a technical review, and that's not something that happens in community forests. Although I'll look at your projects for anything that's obvious. There's not going to be the same team of evaluators reviewing your project to find any problems that you can then fix for the final submission, which is what happens in Farm and Forest. Okay, let's see, again, grants awarded will be July of 2025. So that's all I have today, and I want to thank you for spending time with us. And our grant manuals, like Carl said, are coming soon. They're being posted as we speak. And we're happy to answer any questions. It sounds like Carl's got some he's typing through. And we can read those off to people and give the answers and stuff. So anyway, okay, do we have
Yeah.
anything good?
We do. Thanks, Kim. Yeah, we're working on the manuals. A couple of them just got posted, so CFP is up there. And I think Forest or Farm or both. So yeah, so just keep an eye on that. Make sure when you open one, it says 2024. If not, just give us another day or two.
Oh, for the manuals,
For the
yeah,
manual.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So one question: in community forests, does the land need to be designated in forest land tax status,
It does for WWRP Forestland.
but not in community forest program?
It's highly encouraged. And I think Ben can verify if I have that right, but it's highly encouraged, but it's not required. Is that correct, Ben?
Yeah, that's correct. It's not required. It's encouraged. The land, there are some requirements around the size of the acquisition. Must be at least 5 acres in size. It must be 75% forested or be able to be reforested to that level, which are consistent with the forest land tax designation law. But the land does not have to be enrolled in any sort of tax program.
Okay. In farmland, it's a little different. It says that it has to be eligible. So it's kind of tricky though, because eligible means that you have to get a statement from the county that says that the land meets the definition of open space. And if you applied, the county would allow it to be designated as farmland. Most of the counties are hesitant to do that. And so it's really just easier if you can get that code 83, the farmland designation, without having to fool with a letter from the county. But we have done it in a couple of instances, and it is an option. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, you guys. And then there's just a question just confirming deadlines, so for the authorizing resolution, is that May 1st or July 11? And that's actually the July 11 technical completion date. Most attachments are required at application submit, which is May 1, but there are a few not required until that July 11 date. And if you grab the to-do list for whichever program you're looking at, all of those deadlines and required attachments are listed on those to-do lists. You can track that.
Yeah, and for the community forest folks who maybe aren't as familiar with that form, remember, so when you go to put that under your project under agreement, that becomes a real sticking point. So it's definitely required. Earlier this year, it also requires that you have your governing body sign it and formally adopt that resolution at a meeting. So it's not something you can just do overnight if you forget about it. You want to definitely think about it and plan ahead so that you can take care of it, and it's you're not missing out on an opportunity to apply because you don't have it.
Yep, good point. And let's see, a couple more questions have rolled in. Let's see. Forestland, WWRP, the website mentions leasing land.
It does.
Stating grants can be used to lease forest land.
That is true. We have never had a lease for a forest land project. I don't know what that would look like. If that's something that you're interested in doing and that's what would work for you, call us and we'll talk it through and we'll figure out what needs to be done. I think it's essentially the same as an easement, but and just a slightly different conveyance document. So yeah, you're right. It does allow leases as well. It has to be for a farm, or excuse me, for forest land, it has to be in perpetuity. For farmland, it does not have to be in perpetuity. But it needs to, you get extra points for it being in perpetuity.
All right, thanks, Kim. So here's a CFP community forest question. Does the definition include the requirement for the land to be zoned forest land or in such a way that you actually can log or harvest trees? So not necessarily a tax designation, but a zoning that would allow logging and harvest.
We might have to look at that individually. I know that there's a couple of counties out there that are doing interesting things with some of their zoning that's kind of new for us. And so if you run into a situation where it's not eligible to be zoned, let's talk about it. It might be that, because you're gonna have to share that with the evaluators, and that would certainly cause, even if it is eligible, which I'm not sure, Ben might know. But if it's not, it would certainly cause it to not score as well. You got some thoughts on that one, Ben?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the short answer is no. There is no requirement that the property be zoned as anything specific, forest land or otherwise. I would also say that there are no requirements in the program for harvesting trees. We say that the properties must be actively managed, that timber harvests are an activity that is an allowed use on the property, but there are no harvest requirements that go along with these grant funds. So that can be a component of your community forest if that's something that's valued by the community, but it's also not required either.
Good. Thanks, Ben. This might be another question for you. And a good follow-up. Are there guidelines for how, quote, community is defined?
That's a really good question, and an interesting philosophical one that we could probably spend hours talking about. But the short answer to that is no. The definition of community is purposely ambiguous in this program. So you could define it as a community of geography, of place, of practice, you name it. It's sort of up to whoever is coming together around the values and the benefits that the forest will provide. That can be deemed your community.
Okay, thank you. And then there's one more here for community forest. Since we mentioned acquiring land pre-harvest is beneficial, like to recoup timber value later, could the same thing apply to previous restoration work? Or is previous restoration work seen as valuable during the evaluation process? Not exactly sure how to answer that.
Well, so the idea with the harvesting the timber after you acquire the property is that then if there's revenue that comes, you get to keep that in your organization so that you can use it for other things. And restoration doesn't really provide extra revenue. That's not, unless I'm missing something, unless I guess there's some forest products that might be of use, but primarily there's not a big revenue stream that comes in with that. And, I don't think that tell me if I'm wrong, Ben, but I don't think that the evaluation criteria necessarily say anything about restoration having been done ahead of time. I mean, you could say, it would increase the quality of the stand and the vitality of it. That might be something that you could talk about, but it can also be included in your forest management plan and addressed as you move forward. You have thoughts, Ben?
Not really. I think you covered it pretty well. I think the point that you were trying to make is that, in the presentation is you could potentially use some of the revenues of the timber after the property has been acquired to, essentially replenish what you used as your match contribution. So that's an advantage to potentially pursuing a community forest grant. But yeah, I'm not quite sure about sort of the value of previous restoration work. What that might
If we're,
include.
yeah.
But
if
we
we're
could
missing-
probably
Yeah,
talk
go ahead.
offline about that one too, and if there's some interesting case, we can certainly look
That's
at
what
it.
I was thinking. If we're missing the point of what your question is, let me know, call me or email me and Ben and you and I can all talk about what's the best approach for your project.
Okay, great. So
Yeah.
we'll go ahead and reach out. That was from Ashley. Actually, we'll reach out to you directly.
Okay.
All right, don't see any other questions, but go ahead and type something in if you have another question.
Just to waste a little bit of time, I was gonna say this picture that we included in our, on our last slide, this is during World War II when the women were, working as foresters, during the war. So I just thought it was a cool photo. Oh, those are very small logs and they're very short. They're not your typical 8 foot, but I still liked it.
Bit of history.
Bit of history there.
All right, well, I'm not seeing any, oh, there we go. Please explain how envelopes work for project areas. Can we do that in these programs, like a geographic envelope?
No.
I think those are just for our conservation
Can we-
grant program.
Can we do an?
They're
envelope?
allowed in Forestland or in community forests.
You said yes or no on, what was that? I talked over you. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, no, they are allowed in community forests.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, so the idea with an envelope, and those are something that you want to make sure that you include when you submit a habitat grant, which Carl and Henry talked about earlier today. But basically you draw a line around, so say you've got a block of land and it's all similar habitat, similar forest land, similar timber values or whatever you're looking for in your grant. And you have specific properties within that you are targeting, but there's a long time between the time of application, the time the grant funds are actually available. And we've seen times when people think that there's a really solid application and you can, and they're sure that they're going to be able to acquire a piece of property only to find out that a year and a half, 2 years later, the landowner is no longer interested or they've sold to somebody else. So what this does is it allows you to draw an envelope around that bigger, similar type land that's surrounding your target properties that would be adding to your overall goals for the area. And basically you're saying that if those target properties are no longer available, then we will look to target other land within this geographic envelope. So you want to draw them substantially large enough that you're incorporating all of those what if properties, but you also don't want to make them so big that they're no longer meaningless, right? So they should be focused on land that is contributing to your overall goal. So if you've got land that's already there, that you've already acquired or protected, drawing a line around the outside edge of that and then maybe a little bit more would be helpful. The other thing is that there's two-part process with envelopes. There's a map that's required that shows the target properties and then, the rest of the area that could be considered. And then there's also a written description of how you will apply that envelope. Basically saying what I just described, where these are my targets, this is what we're going to do if we can't apply for, if we can't get acquire those properties. And now those envelopes make it a whole lot easier if you need to do a scope change down the road, right? Because otherwise you might be looking at either no, from our director or from our agency that we can't accept whatever replacement property you're proposing, or we might have to take it to our board, which takes a considerable amount of time. So those envelopes are a good thing, but they are not for farm and forest land. They are okay for community forest and for the habitat program projects.
And I'll just jump in too, Kim, and clarify
Oh.
that the total acres acquired within a geographic envelope still have to meet that 5-acre minimum for community forest, definition. It
Okay.
can be in aggregated parcels,
Okay.
adding up to 5 acres
Uh-huh.
within that envelope, but they, have to at least meet that 5-acre minimum.
Okay. When you say aggregated, are you talking about like, say you've got a block of habitat or forest there and you want to add on to it, so you can add on like an acre here and an acre on the other side? Is that what you mean aggregated? Okay,
Yeah, combined together, yes.
okay,
You just have to add up to 5 acres.
okay.
I have a related question to that for you, for the two of you, because you're the experts in this. So in our conservation grants, geographic envelopes, we would typically see a predefined or adopted long-term boundary of, say, a park, a conservation area. Would we look for something like that for a community forest? Like they've established, here's what we want it to be, and we're slowly buying it up, so we know actually what the geographic area is?
Well, so that geographic boundary is usually like a DNR thing where they've formally adopted their natural area preserve or recreation area boundaries, and it's a formal thing that their commissioner has adopted. And we see that less from people like Fish and Wildlife. Fish and Wildlife might have wildlife units that are within a wildlife area, but they don't have specific boundaries around, how far out they're gonna go with each one of those units. It depends a lot more on availability and opportunities, really, so I would imagine, Ben, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I would imagine that most communities don't have a formally identified boundary either, and they're more leave it to more of a strategic opportunity for acquiring whatever's available. Is that what you're?
Yeah, and especially if you're establishing a new community forest, you may not have a, core tract yet. But you may be, for example, targeting a geographic area that's near, say, your city or within your county, where there's maybe a checkerboarded landscape, for example, and you're
Natural
targeting
boundaries
kind
or
of
something.
an
Yeah.
area around that checkerboarded landscape where you're trying to acquire different parcels to create your community forest or add to your existing community forest. That's where that geographic boundary can come in handy.
Yeah, so I mean, it's getting back to the whole idea that the geographic envelope needs to tell a story, right? It needs to say, these are similar habitat, this is similar land, this is good for the same reason that the target property is, and it leads to our overall goal, right? We're gonna try to acquire all the habitat and all the land on this side of the river, or, within this valley, or, it's like an overall goal. So it kind of tells a story of what your organizational goals are. And, we can look at those. I'm always happy to look at envelopes, and see if you're wondering.
Thank you. Question here. In the evaluation of community forest, if you're planning harvest activities, would you score higher than those that do not plan any timber harvest? So is that rewarded in our criteria?
I don't think so. What do you think, Ben? I mean, since you're not required to do timber harvest.
I would,
Yeah, go ahead.
sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, Kim. Go ahead.
No.
I would say not directly. But there are criteria in the evaluation process that speak to sort of the long-term sustainability, financially and operationally of the forest. And
yeah.
so to the extent that you
Yeah.
can show that you've considered how you're going to maintain the forest for all the values that for which you're protecting it, and maintain the momentum and the community input and the community process, some of that might be maintained through harvesting timber and recouping a income from selective harvesting, to contribute to standing up and managing into the long term that community forest. So I'd say not directly, but sort of tangentially through those other criteria.
Yeah, I like that.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, this is a good question. So what would happen, this community forest, again, what would happen? We're trying to purchase multiple parcels totaling more than 5 acres. But then some property owners decide they're no longer willing. And now the acres drops below the 5 acre limit. What happens? But the project's already under agreement and underway. What happens?
It's a good question.
I haven't had that one before.
Yeah.
Maybe
I think
board.
Sorry, go ahead, Carl.
I was just thinking out loud, maybe we go to our board for a policy exception, kind of a one-off. Hey, we ran into this weird situation.
Yeah. I would also say, the community forests that we've seen come through this program to date have all been substantially larger than 5 acres in size. And when you're thinking about that, sort of what does it take to build a financially and operationally sustainable community forest, it's likely going to take more than 5 acres. And so maybe not, but it's a pretty low bar to meet, I would say. But yeah, Carl, you're absolutely right. I think if something weird like that happened, we would have to take it to the director in this case, who has the sort of funding authority for this program, and have a conversation and make a decision around that.
I think that I would also just kind of bring up again the difference between eligibility and competitiveness, right? So it might be eligible to have a small 5 acre farm or community forest, but think about how well that's going to compete against ones that are, 1,000 acres. I mean, if you've got a good focus and a good purpose and a good community outreach and good, defined values and targets and goals, it might be fine, but short of that, it may not be as competitive as those bigger acquisitions. And I think some of that is getting into the fact that each application has to be a standalone experience, right? So a standalone project. It can't be, I guess some of them can be building on other land that's in the area, but if you don't have a block of something that you're working on, having a 1 acre piece of property might make it a little tough to have a standalone competitive project. So anyway, we'll talk.
Gotcha.
We'll talk. If that comes up, let's talk.
Yeah. And then last, so Andrea noticed a discrepancy. Community forest, does that use a written evaluation process, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Correct.
Written, okay, so on our website and our to-do list says written. But in the manual, it looks like we mistakenly cut and paste the paragraphs that talk about a PowerPoint. So we'll get that corrected.
There's no, right? Am I like, it's written, right, Ben? It's written. It's in, it's in Prism.
Yeah, it's written. Yep.
Yeah, it's written.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
I just want to make sure my brain's tired.
All right, so we'll get that. We will, if anyone sees that in the manual, we'll get that fixed.
Thanks, Andrea.
Yeah, good. catch.
Oopsie.
Manual.
Yeah.
Oopsie daisy.
I don't see any other questions rolling in here, so I think we're good.
All right. I am so glad Ben was here. Thank you very much. And I'm really glad, really, I'm really super excited about the community forest program. And, it's something that we would really like to see get off the ground and start running. And, of course, I'm biased for farm and forest as well for WWRP, but, community forest is our new program. It's just kind of an exciting thing to see the new applications come in for and just the new opportunities. I'm excited to see what communities do with that program and how, where it goes. So by all means, let's talk about things, and we can talk about specific projects. Love to see them. I can help you scope things. I can, whatever you need, just let's talk. Okay. Yeah. Awesome.
All right.
Awesome.
Thanks, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you.